Michael Turner, a decorated veteran, was abandoned by the very system he served, left to sleep in his truck while the world dismissed him as worthless. When police laughed at his discovery of a hidden box of priceless treasures, they became the face of that injustice. But with Rusty's unshakable loyalty and his own relentless determination, Michael turned what seemed like a forgotten scrap into a life-changing breakthrough. Just wait until you see how fate answered his fight and how justice finally found its way back to him. Michael Turner was only 42, but life had aged him far beyond his years. His back was stiff from too many nights in the driver's seat of a dented Ford F-150, his skin weathered from the sun that poured through cracked windows, and his eyes carried the heavy silence of memories he rarely spoke about. Just a few years earlier, he had returned from serving his country, believing he was stepping back into a life that would welcome him with open arms. Instead, everything unraveled. The first to go was his home. He had worked construction jobs when he could, but medical bills stacked high after a back injury, and the bank letters came in relentless waves. One morning he stood in his empty living room as movers hauled out the last of his furniture, his name erased from the deed that once made him proud. After that, his marriage crumbled under the weight of bills, stress, and arguments that stretched late into the night. Michael didn't blame his wife for leaving. Sometimes he thought he might have done the same if he had the choice. What hurt most was seeing his little boy wave goodbye from the back seat of a car that wasn't his anymore. By the time his savings were gone, Michael found himself with nothing but a rusted truck, a bag of clothes, and the loyal brown-eyed shepherd mix he had rescued years earlier. Rusty. The dog became more than just a companion. Rusty was family, guardian, and comfort rolled into one. He sat beside Michael through freezing nights, rested his head on his lap when the silence became unbearable, and wagged his tail as if to remind Michael that he still mattered, even when the world acted as if he didn't. But to the people who passed by the gas station lot where Michael often parked, the sight of a man sleeping in an old pickup carried a different story. They didn't see the veteran who had once marched through deserts in heavy armor. They didn't see the man who had risked his life for strangers he would never meet again. They saw someone hunched in the driver's seat, his belongings stuffed in plastic bags, his dog keeping watch by his side. The glances were sharp, the whispers cruel. A mother tugged her child closer when they walked past his truck, murmuring, "Don't stare." A group of young men laughed one evening, pointing at his boots drying on the hood. "Get a job, old man," one shouted as they walked into the store. To them, Michael was a story they thought they understood, a man who must have made bad choices, wasted opportunities, or simply given up. Michael said nothing back. He never raised his voice or tried to explain. Explaining never helped. Once he had tried. He told a clerk at the convenience store that he had served in the army, that he was waiting for paperwork on benefits that kept getting delayed, that he was just trying to stay afloat. The clerk had nodded politely, but the look in her eyes was clear. Doubt, the kind that said she didn't believe a word. After that, Michael stopped sharing his story. At night, when the parking lot grew quiet and the bright lights of the gas station flickered against the windshield, Michael would rest his hand on Rusty's fur and close his eyes. He wasn't bitter, at least not most days, but there was a deep sting in knowing how invisible he had become. Once he had worn a uniform that made strangers shake his hand. Now those same strangers crossed the street to avoid him. Rusty, however, never wavered. When Michael sat outside the truck with his back against the wheel, the dog pressed close, warm and steady. When hunger gnawed, Michael would split a sandwich in two, half for himself, half for Rusty. And when cold winds blew through the night, Rusty curled tightly against him, as if to shield him from the world's contempt. To the people passing by, Michael Turner was just another failure in a forgotten corner of a gas station. But inside that truck was a man holding on to the last threads of dignity, kept alive by loyalty, memory, and the faint hope that life might one day see him differently. Michael Turner lived each day as if clinging to invisible threads, refusing to let the world strip away the last pieces of his dignity. Though he had lost his home, his savings, and the comfort of family, he would not surrender entirely to despair. Every morning, before the sun rose, he walked into the gas station restroom with a small kit he carried in a worn-out toiletry bag. There, under the harsh fluorescent lights, he washed his face, brushed his teeth, and shaved carefully, as if preparing to march out on duty again. The mirror reflected a tired man with graying stubble and circles under his eyes, but it also reflected his determination. If nothing else, he would remain presentable. To the casual observer, those routines might have seemed meaningless, but for Michael, they were acts of resistance. They were his way of saying, "I am still here. I am still human." Rusty always waited outside the restroom door, tail sweeping the ground the moment his companion stepped out. Michael would smile faintly, patting his head. "Good boy," he whispered, and the two would walk back to the truck together, as though it were their fortress in a world that often felt hostile. Meals were simple: sandwiches from a convenience store, a can of soup when he could heat it, sometimes just crackers and water. No matter how little there was, Rusty always received his share. Michael tore each portion carefully, setting half in front of his dog before taking a bite himself. "We share everything, partner," he would say. And Rusty, with his steady eyes and grateful wag, made Michael feel rich in a way no money could. But when the sun set and silence spread over the parking lot, the weight of his memories pressed hardest. There were moments when Michael's mind wandered back to endless stretches of desert, the sound of boots crunching sand, the orders shouted above the noise of engines. He remembered the pride he once felt wearing his uniform, believing that service would mean security afterward. Instead, he had returned to a system full of red tape, delays, and closed doors. Letters promising review in progress piled up while his situation grew worse. Some nights, those thoughts became heavy enough to make him feel like a shadow of the man he used to be. But that was when Rusty came closer, nudging his head under Michael's hand, grounding him in the present. The dog's quiet loyalty reminded him he wasn't entirely alone, not yet. One rainy night, Michael sat inside the truck as water streaked the windshield. The heater hadn't worked in months, and the air was damp and cold. Rusty curled beside him, pressing warmth into his side. Michael rested his hand on the dog's back, his voice breaking as he whispered, "You're the only reason I'm still here, buddy." Rusty tilted his head as if he understood every word, as if he carried part of Michael's burden just by listening. In that moment, the contrast was striking. Here was a man who had once carried weighty responsibilities, entrusted with lives and missions, now sitting in a truck that barely ran. Yet, instead of surrendering, he held on, because of love, loyalty, and the smallest sparks of dignity. Viewers can feel their hearts tighten at the scene. The proud veteran had not been undone by laziness or lack of effort. He had been left behind by a broken system, one that forgot promises made to those who served. His fight wasn't just for survival. It was for recognition, for meaning, for the right to still believe he mattered. And as the rain tapped gently on the roof of that truck, It became clear that Michael's greatest strength wasn't what he once carried on the battlefield, but what he carried now in silence: resilience, hope, and the bond with a dog who never stopped believing in him. It was a morning unlike any other. The air was damp from overnight rain, the sky overcast, and a soft mist hung over the gas station where Michael Turner had parked his truck for weeks. Rusty, as usual, had already jumped out of the cab before Michael could unlock the door, padding quietly into the nearby lot. He sniffed along the cracked pavement, his ears flicking at every sound: a bird calling, the distant hum of traffic. Michael watched him with a faint smile, wiping his hands on a rag. The routine of their days was small and predictable, until Rusty disappeared behind a row of dumpsters by an abandoned storage lot. Michael called softly, "Rusty, come on," but the dog didn't respond. Curiosity stirred in Michael as he followed. There, behind a stack of rotting crates, Rusty's paws scratched at something buried under old newspapers and scraps of cardboard. Michael stepped closer and saw the corner of a weathered wooden box. At first, he hesitated. He had learned over years that curiosity could bring trouble. Still, something in Rusty's persistence pulled him forward. He crouched and brushed debris away. The wood was cracked and faded. The lock rusted shut. Michael pried it open with a small crowbar he kept in the truck. Inside lay an assortment of objects that caught the light in unexpected ways: old coins, tarnished jewelry, faded letters, and silver trinkets. The coins glimmered faintly, and Michael's breath caught. For a moment he considered calling the police. It felt like the right thing to do. But then a thought crept in. Would anyone listen to him? In a world that had already dismissed him as a broken veteran, what guarantee was there that they would take him seriously? Still, he went to the station. He walked in, clutching the box under his arm. The reception clerk glanced at him, then at the contents, and laughed softly. "Sure, war hero." "You found treasure in the trash?" she said, her tone dripping with disbelief. Behind her, 2 officers glanced up, smirking. Michael left without a word, the box heavier in his hands, not because of its contents, but because of the dismissal. That night, back in his truck with Rusty curled at his feet, Michael spread the items on a blanket. He studied each piece under the weak light of his dashboard lamp. Somewhere between the faint glint of a coin and the delicate engraving of an old ring, he found resolve. This wasn't just trash. It was something worth fighting for. The next days became a quiet mission. Michael researched from public libraries, typing on a borrowed computer at the community center. He knocked on doors in nearby neighborhoods, asking about the lot and its history. He sent careful emails to antique dealers and historical societies. At times it felt like shouting into the wind, but he refused to give up. One afternoon, an email reply came from a dealer in the city. The message was brief but electrifying. "Do you know what you've got here? This is life-changing." Michael leaned back in his truck seat, staring at Rusty. His dog cocked his head as if sensing the shift. In that moment, Michael felt something he hadn't in months: a spark of belief. Not just in the value of what he'd found, but in himself. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was fighting for something that could change everything. And it wasn't just about wealth. It was about proving that even in the darkest chapters of life, persistence and faith could uncover something remarkable. Michael's story was no longer one of despair. It was becoming a story worth telling. That night, as rain began to fall again, Michael closed the truck door, Rusty at his side. There was a quiet determination in his eyes, an unshakable sense that this moment was more than luck. It was a turning point, and the world, as he knew it, was about to change forever. The morning air felt different that day, crisp, clear, with the kind of quiet that comes before a new beginning. Michael Turner stood outside his truck, now gleaming after a week in the shop, the engine humming softly beneath his hand. Rusty stretched and wagged his tail, ears perked, as if sensing something in the air that Michael himself could not yet name. In his hands was a certified check, proof of the value of the box Rusty had found weeks earlier. Michael had never seen so many zeros in his life. It wasn't just money. It was transformation. It was the possibility of rewriting the story he had lived for far too long. He walked into the bank that afternoon, a quiet confidence in his step. The worn jacket over his shoulders carried no airs of grandeur, but there was a steady pride in his eyes. This was not a man begging for charity. This was a man who had fought tooth and nail for every chance he had been denied. The bank teller looked up, startled, then smiled as she examined the check. Michael signed the documents, his signature steady despite years of uncertainty. He left the bank not as the veteran who had been overlooked and ignored, but as a man who had reclaimed his dignity. Outside, the world seemed to take notice. People who had passed by him at the gas station, the same lot where they once glanced away in contempt, now looked on with curiosity, even envy. A neighbor who used to avoid eye contact nodded in acknowledgement. A cashier in the convenience store paused mid-task to give him a quiet smile. And somewhere down the road, behind the wheel of his repaired truck, Rusty's head stuck out the window, ears flapping in the wind, as if celebrating the victory with him. But Michael did not seek applause. He did not want to parade his good fortune. For him, the triumph was something quieter, something deeper. He thought of the countless veterans who, like him, had been left behind, men and women sleeping in their vehicles, carrying invisible burdens no one seemed to notice. Before making any extravagant plans for himself, Michael reached out to a local veteran housing program. He donated a portion of his earnings, enough to help several veterans find a safe place to call home. It was not just charity, it was a statement. He wanted others to know they were not invisible, that they too deserved a chance to stand again. That evening, Michael drove Rusty to a quiet stretch of road on the outskirts of town. The sun was dipping low, casting a golden glow over the horizon. He parked beside a field and stepped out, breathing deeply. Rusty sat by his side, watching silently. Michael looked at him and smiled. "This was worth it, buddy," he said softly. "We made it." It was a moment of pure satisfaction, earned through persistence, patience, and an unshakable bond between man and dog. Michael knew his life had changed, but more importantly, he knew what had made the change possible, refusing to give up even when the world had turned away. The camera would linger on this scene, a man once labeled homeless and weak, standing tall beside his faithful friend, the repaired truck gleaming under the fading sun. It was the kind of image that stays with a person, a symbol of resilience and redemption. Viewers would leave with something more than closure. They would leave with admiration. Admiration for Michael's strength, compassion for his struggle, and inspiration from his choice to turn personal victory into a gift for others. Michael Turner's story was no longer one of contempt or struggle. It had become a story of satisfaction, a reminder that even in the lowest moments, hope can be found, dignity can be reclaimed, and life can be rebuilt. And for Michael, the greatest reward was not the check in his hand, but the truth that he had never let go of the one loyal friend who kept him believing in the possibility of better days.